The clinking of iron chains echoed through the cold prison hallway, blending with the low whistling of the wind as it slipped through the steel bars. Jake Harrison, once a respected police officer, now sat motionless in the courtroom, his hands tightly cuffed, his sharp gaze sweeping across the faces in the crowd. The flickering fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows on his face, emphasizing the deep hollows beneath his sleepless, tense eyes. He had been sentenced to death for the murder of journalist Ethan Brooks, a crime he swore on his honor he did not commit. The evidence against Jake was almost too perfect. Gunpowder residue on his hands, a blurry security camera video showing someone who resembled him entering Brooks' apartment, and the unwavering testimony of a witness who claimed to have seen him at the crime scene that fateful night. Everything aligned too neatly, too smoothly, making it impossible for Jake not to suspect that someone had meticulously orchestrated his downfall. The trial ended with the jury's cold verdict: guilty, death by lethal injection. A murmur spread through the courtroom, but Jake heard nothing beyond the pounding of his own heartbeat. His lawyer, Michael Reed, sat with his head bowed, shoulders slumped in defeat, while prosecutor Rachel Carter smirked triumphantly. In the back row, Emily Stone, Jake's trusted colleague for the past 5 years, remained still as a statue. Her face was an unreadable mask, but for a fleeting moment, Jake thought he saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes, too brief to grasp. As the guards led him away, his legs felt like lead, his mind swirling with a single unrelenting question: who was behind all of this? And why? Then, unexpectedly, his German shepherd, Titan, appeared like a sliver of hope in the nightmare. Outside the courthouse, Titan stood with a temporary caretaker, ears perked, eyes sharp and locked onto Jake as the heavy doors swung open. Seeing his owner in cuffs, Titan tensed, barking loudly, pulling on his leash with such force that the handler nearly lost their balance. "Easy there, buddy," the caretaker muttered, struggling to restrain the dog, but Titan refused to back down. His barking grew more frantic, more desperate, as if he alone could sense the terrible wrongness of it all, a truth no one else in the chaotic crowd seemed to perceive. Jake was shoved into the prison transport van, unable to look back at Titan, but the dog's cries echoed in his mind, a reminder that he was not entirely alone. That night, in the cramped confines of Death Island's prison cell, Jake lay on a thin mattress, staring at the dull gray ceiling. The brutal reality crashed over him like relentless waves. He was going to die for a crime he didn't commit. Miles away in Emily's small downtown apartment, Titan paced restlessly. Emily had taken him in temporarily, telling herself it was only a short-term solution until she found a new home for him. But Titan seemed to have his own plan. He kept moving between the door and the window, his claws clicking against the hardwood floor, occasionally pausing to whimper, his anxious eyes pleading with Emily to do something. "He's not coming back, boy," she murmured, but Titan refused to accept it. He continued to pace, waiting for a master who would never return, or at least that's what everyone believed. The next morning, as Emily clipped on Titan's leash for a walk, the dog suddenly lunged forward with unexpected strength, nearly yanking her off balance, dragging her straight toward the old docks. They hadn't been there in months, not since the last case she and Jake had worked together. Titan moved with an uncanny determination, his nose working furiously, leading Emily past abandoned warehouses at a pace she struggled to match. "Titan, stop," she commanded, but the dog ignored her, pulling her to a specific spot near the docks. There, in the dust and dirt, Titan halted, his nose pressing against the ground, paws digging frantically until a charred piece of fabric emerged. Emily crouched down, picking it up, rough, thick material like a police uniform, its edges scorched black. Her heart pounded. Titan lifted his head, eyes locked onto hers as if to say, "This is just the beginning. We need to dig deeper." And in that moment, everything changed. Hope flickered in the darkness, because no matter how deeply buried the truth was, Titan's unwavering loyalty might just be the key to bringing it to light. The rain growled outside Emily Stone's apartment like an ominous soundtrack, each drop pounding against the window as if trying to shatter the suffocating silence within. The dim light from an old desk lamp cast a glow over the kitchen table, where Emily had spread out crime scene photos from Ethan Brooks' murder, copies she had secretly taken from police files before they were locked away in the archives. Her hands trembled as she held the charred piece of fabric Titan had found at the docks, the thick material unmistakably belonging to a police uniform. A cold shiver ran down her spine. Jake Harrison, her closest friend, was locked away on Death Island, awaiting execution, and she knew for certain that he was innocent. But who had orchestrated this perfect trap? And why? Titan lay curled at her feet, but his sharp eyes never left her, as if waiting for an invisible command. That night, when Emily finally dozed off on the sofa, she was jolted awake by Titan's low whimper. The dog stood, claws tapping urgently against the floor, pulling her toward the door with an insistence she couldn't ignore. All right, she mumbled, slipping on her coat and grabbing the leash. But as they stepped outside under a sky slashed by distant lightning, Titan pulled her toward the docks, his apparent obsession. This time he didn't stop at the usual spot. He darted through dark alleys between warehouses, nose working furiously, until he halted beside a damp pile of trash. Emily knelt down, heart pounding, brushing away the dirt. The beam from her small flashlight illuminated a gleaming brass shell casing, a spent bullet buried like a secret never meant to be found. Meanwhile, on Death Island, Jake lay on his cold prison cot, the flickering fluorescent light overhead teasing his fading sanity. The distant screams of another inmate echoed through the concrete walls, blending with the cruel laughter of the guards. Jake knew he was being watched, not just by the hollow eyes of fellow prisoners, but by one man in particular, prison guard Derek Walsh. With his narrowed eyes and smirking lips, Walsh often lingered outside Jake's cell, pretending to check records while his gaze remained sharp, predatory. "Heard you used to be a cop," Walsh sneered once, his tone dripping with mockery. "How's it feel now, hero? Just another rat in a cage." Jake didn't respond, but he knew Walsh wasn't just another prison guard. He was working for someone. And that someone wanted Jake dead before the truth could surface. Back in the city, Emily took the bullet casing to an old friend, Dr. Henry Carter, a retired forensic analyst whose hands were still steady and mind as sharp as ever. In his damp, chemical-scented basement lab, Henry examined the bullet under a microscope, his initial curiosity turning to shock. "This isn't from Jake's gun," he concluded, his voice low but firm. "The bullet that killed Brooks was a 9mm. This one's a .45, completely different. And these markings, they don't match the official forensics report." Emily felt her pulse spike, a flicker of hope in the storm of doubt. But that hope was quickly crushed when she received a text from an unknown number: "Walk away or the dog dies next." She glanced down at Titan, whose faithful eyes watched her intently, and fury ignited in her chest. The following night, as Emily pieced together the fragments of the case in her apartment, a sudden, forceful knock at the door made her jump. Titan growled, fur bristling, charging toward the entrance before she could react. Peering through the peephole, she saw no one, but a shadow flickered under the dim streetlight. Reaching for her gun, she cautiously opened the door, only to find a small box resting on the doorstep. Inside lay Jake's police badge stained with dried blood, a chilling, unmistakable warning. "They're playing a game," she whispered to Titan, but the dog simply stared at her as if urging her to fight back. In prison, Jake knew time was running out. One morning, as Walsh passed by his cell, he paused longer than usual, his eyes glinting with something sinister. "Someone wants to see you, Harrison," Walsh muttered, slipping a scrap of paper through the bars. Jake picked it up, his pulse freezing at the crude handwriting: "Stay silent or die sooner than scheduled." Moments later, in the exercise yard, 3 burly inmates suddenly closed in. A surprise punch to his gut sent him doubling over, but Jake refused to go down without a fight. He retaliated with a sharp jab to one attacker's jaw and a brutal kick to another's knee. But the third man pulled a makeshift shiv, its blade flashing in the sunlight. Before it could strike, Walsh unexpectedly intervened, cracking his baton against the assailant's ribs. "Enough," Walsh barked, but his gaze toward Jake wasn't one of salvation, it was a warning. His death was planned. Just not yet. Meanwhile, Emily decided to reach out to Ryan Parker, an independent journalist who had once worked with Ethan Brooks. In Ryan's cluttered apartment, amidst scattered papers and cold coffee, they reviewed Brooks' final notes. One name surfaced repeatedly: Robert Kane, Deputy Police Chief. Ryan pointed to a scribbled line: "Kane. Meet at the docks. Expose everything." Emily's stomach turned as she recalled the security footage Ryan had recovered from a nearby dockside camera. A figure in a police jacket, his left hand revealing a distinct scar she had seen before on Kane during internal meetings. "He's the one pulling the strings," Ryan murmured, his voice trembling with realization. But before they could leave, headlights from an unfamiliar car flashed through the window, and an engine roared in the darkness. Titan growled fiercely, and Emily knew they had crossed a dangerous threshold, one where the enemy didn't just want Jake dead. They wanted the truth buried forever. The sky over Death Island burned blood red as the sun set, its feeble light seeping through dust-covered iron bars, casting shadows across Jake Harrison's weathered face. He sat on the rigid prison cot, his hands gripping the edge so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The warning from an old friend, former Detective Sam Carter, echoed in his mind, "They're moving up your execution date. No more appeals, no more delays." Jake's time was running out, perhaps only days, maybe just hours, and he knew that if he didn't act now, death would come in the form of a cold, lethal injection. His mind settled on one inevitable choice: escape. He had spent months observing, memorizing every guard's routine, every blind spot in the corridors, every weakness in the security system. But Derek Walsh, the sadistic prison guard with those merciless eyes, was always the greatest obstacle, a shadow that never left him alone. Meanwhile, deep in the woods hours from the city, Emily Stone and Ryan Parker huddled around an old wooden table inside a secluded cabin. The dim light from an oil lamp flickered over their scattered papers and laptop. Titan lay beside Emily, ears perked, eyes sharp as he tracked her every move. Ryan pointed at his laptop screen, where he had just decoded an audio file from the USB drive they had recovered from the ransacked apartment of James Dawson, a former cop who had worked with Ethan Brooks. Brooks' voice crackled through the speakers, hoarse yet resolute. "Dawson, tell me again what you saw inside Kane's task force." Then came Dawson's trembling response: "Kane wasn't just trafficking drugs. He was using the police evidence locker to move weapons. I can't stay silent anymore." The recording continued, exposing that Kane had orchestrated Jake's framing to silence Brooks. And the one who had carried it out? Sam Carter, the very mentor Emily had once trusted beyond doubt. Emily felt the ground beneath her give way. Sam, the man who had taught her to fire a gun, to read crime scenes, was a traitor. Her nails dug into her palms until they bled. Ryan pulled up another document on his screen. "Look at this. Large payments deposited into Sam's account right after the Brooks case. Kane has leverage on him." There was no time to grieve. Emily dialed Sam's number, her voice like ice. "Meet me at Rusty Anchor. We need to talk." When Sam walked into the dimly lit bar, his face remained unreadable, but his eyes flickered with unease as Emily placed the USB drive on the table. "I never wanted you involved in this, kid," Sam said, his voice low and cold. "But you've gone too far now." He admitted to helping Kane frame Jake but insisted that Brooks' murder had never been part of the plan. That was Kane's mistake. Back in prison, Jake's opportunity came when a riot erupted in the East Wing. Shouts, shattering glass, and blaring alarms tore through the air. Guards rushed to contain the chaos, even Walsh turning his head for a split second. Jake seized the moment. As Walsh passed, Jake slammed his food tray into the back of his head, sending the guards sprawling. Snatching the keycard from Walsh's belt, Jake sprinted into the corridor, heart hammering. The red emergency lights flashed, the pounding footsteps of guards echoing behind him. He reached the yard, scrambled over the razor wire fence, the metal cutting deep into his palms. But just as his feet hit the ground outside, blinding headlights from a black SUV flooded his vision. The doors burst open and two burly men seized him, pressing a gun to his ribs. "You should have stayed put, Harrison," one of them growled. At the bar, Emily stood, gun aimed directly at Sam. "You're going to help me take Kane down," she said, her voice steady. Sam smirked, a flicker of pride in his gaze. "You really are just like Jake," he muttered, then stood. They drove toward an abandoned warehouse where Ryan had traced Kane's last known signal, a location hidden within an encrypted message. Inside the warehouse, Jake sat bound to a chair, blood trickling from his temple onto the concrete floor. Robert Kane emerged from the shadows, his tailored suit in eerie contrast to the decaying surroundings. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" Kane taunted, swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand. But Jake had been ready. He ripped free from his bindings, lunging for a nearby metal pipe, smashing it into one of his captor's kneecaps with a sickening crack. He fought with raw desperation, fists colliding with flesh and bone. Kane merely watched, then slowly drew a pistol, aiming directly at Jake's head. At that moment, the warehouse doors burst open. Emily and Sam stormed in, gunfire erupting. A bullet from Emily struck Kane's arm, making him howl in pain. He lunged at her, slashing a knife across her side, blood staining her clothes. Jake roared in fury, tackling Kane. They grappled violently, trading blows until Kane pinned Jake down, blade raised high. Then, out of nowhere, Titan charged in, having tracked Emily's scent from her car. The dog leaped, clamping his powerful jaws around Kane's wrist, forcing the knife from his grip. Sam retrieved Emily's fallen gun, pointing it at Kane's head. "It's over," he declared as the wail of sirens grew closer. Emily had already called SWAT. Kane was arrested, but the battle wasn't over. From his prison cell, he continued to pull strings, ensuring key witnesses disappeared and evidence vanished. Emily, Jake, and Ryan set a trap, leaking false information about Kane's transfer, baiting his operatives into action. That night, on a deserted road, SWAT and the FBI ambushed them, dismantling Kane's entire network. In a final confrontation beneath a secret tunnel, Jake and Emily fought Kane one last time. After a brutal hand-to-hand battle, where Titan once again saved them, Kane was finally subdued. He was placed in solitary confinement, his empire crumbling into nothing. Jake was exonerated but refused to return to the police force. Emily too left her badge behind. Instead, they opened a private investigation firm with Ryan. Titan, now retired, enjoyed peaceful days by the seaside with his two devoted owners. One evening, as the sun dipped into the horizon, Jake and Emily sat on the sand, beers in hand, watching Titan frolic in the waves. "So what now?" Emily mused. Jake smirked, taking a slow sip. "We keep going." Before them lay an open future, free, untamed, and full of promise.